I want to stop it when I'm elected. I want the deficit spending to stop with me. A lot of people want to talk about it, talk about balancing the budget, talk about balanced budget amendments. Yeah, that's all talk. They've been talking about a balanced budget amendment since I was born, right? And it's never there. Everybody can be for it because nobody actually has to vote for it. That meanwhile they can vote for all the spending, they can raise the debt ceiling. Not when I get there. I want to get 40 other senators to stand with me to vote against the debt ceiling increase, and then that's it. They can't spend money. We don't have to repeal Obamacare because they can't fund it if they can't borrow. If I can take away their charge card, it all ends. And they have to start cutting the deficit spending. Because right now, they're spending almost $4 trillion, but they're only collecting, and I'm putting only in quotes, $2.5 trillion in taxes. That's plenty of money. They can get by with that. And if we can cut enough spending, then we can start cutting taxes. There are a lot of politicians that want to talk about tax cuts, right? Tax cuts are great. I'm all for them. But we can't have them unless we cut spending. Because if you cut taxes and just run a bigger deficit, well, that's worse. Because now we have to pay that money in the future with interest, or we're going to have more inflation. But either way, we're going to have to pay for that government. And it's better to pay for it with taxes than with debt or with inflation. Right? So we need to shrink the government. I'm going to do it. I'm going to get the senators that are there now to understand how high the stakes are, to get them to put the country before their own reelection. Because we can't solve these problems if you're concerned about getting reelected. Because nothing's going to get cut. Everybody is afraid to piss off a special interest group. Nobody wants to, deny anybody something. I mean, you can't cut spending without taking away a benefit from somebody. But the problem is we're broke. We can't afford all this spending, and it's going to drive the country into the ground. So I mean what I say. I'm going to do what I say. It's not, I'm not like any of these politicians, because, I'm not in it. Right? I haven't been. This is my career. I've been very consistent for my entire life in what I believe in and what I stand for. And I'm one of the only people that actually had the foresight and the courage to speak up years ago when there was actually time to do something about it, time to act preemptively. But politicians never want to do that. I mean, they never want to avert a crisis, right? Because that they don't want to confront it. They want to postpone it because they're worried about getting reelected. But we can't do that anymore. We need to do something now, not in the future. And then anyway, let me just take as many questions as you can about where I stand on the issues, about what my strategy is to win this race, or anything like that.
I'll start the ball rolling then. So I think everybody here applauds your desire to cut the deficit and shrink the government. I think it's great. But in that effort to do that, would you be willing to make a deal with the devil and raise taxes that the Democrats say, okay,
no.
We'll cut the size of the government if you raise taxes?
No, there is...
Because that's what they're going to say.
No, but if they try to raise taxes, I'll filibuster that too. I mean, I'm not going there to make government bigger and giving them more money. I mean, they pulled the same junk in Connecticut. When they got Connecticut to swallow the income tax, now the state is in a bigger fiscal wreck with the income tax than without it. I mean, government is going to spend whatever money they collect. I mean, Ronald Reagan made that mistake, right? I've seen that movie. I know how it ends, and I'm not going to do it. We're just going to cut spending. In fact, I want to cut taxes. I think taxes are too high in this country. The problem is they're not high enough considering all the spending. It's the spending that's out of control. And we need to get that under control first. I mean, how can the government be spending twice as much as it did 10 years ago? Because I thought the government was too big 10 years ago. Right? I mean, how many in this room thought the government was too big 10 years ago? Right? Well, so in order to get it back to where it was 10 years ago, we got to have it. I mean, that's a lot of cuts. So, no, I want to abolish entire departments. I want to go through that budget, and if I can stop the debt ceiling from being raised, they have no choice. That's all they can do. And I want to turn the attention to how can we dismantle this government. Well, all the politicians, every year, all they've done is figure out how they can pass new rules and new regulations and new laws. I want to change it to focus on what can we repeal? How can we dismantle this? Because our country became the richest country in the world because we had the lowest taxes, the least amount of regulation. Government was tiny, right? 100 years ago, the government in this country, federal, state, and local, all three combined, consumed less than 5% of our GNP. It was tiny. Government was an afterthought. You didn't have to worry about, people didn't pay income taxes, they didn't pay Social Security taxes. We had a powerful, rich country because freedom was here, and we built up an industry, and we built the higher standard of living that the world has ever seen. We are now the world's biggest debtor nation. The whole thing is crumbling. Our infrastructure, our industries are being driven into the ground. I watched a program last night about Detroit. I don't know how many people saw that. Look what the government did to that city. The automobile industry had the Motown. That was a vibrant city. And look at it. Look at 30 or 40 years of big government, and it gutted that whole city. It looks like a war zone. It's like could it have been any worse if a foreign country had invaded Detroit? No, it was invaded by Washington. We need to put a stop to that. So the answer to your question is absolutely not. There's not going to be a single tax that's raised when I'm in the Senate.
Tricia?
How do you feel about getting rid of the IRS and just having a flat tax?
Well, ideally, I'd like to get rid of the IRS and have a flat tax of 0. And that's about the way I'd like a flat tax.
Okay, but in real world...
But, the income tax is the worst way to raise money. Right? Absolutely. From an economical point of view, from a constitutional point of view, it's terrible. Right? You have to, you give up all your individual rights, you give up all your privacy, you gotta be a pack rat, you gotta keep records, you gotta hire accountants. In fact, there are a lot of small businesses, the only reason they keep records is so they can pay taxes. If they didn't have to pay their taxes, they wouldn't even bother. So I don't like it from a personal liberty point of view, and from an economic point of view, what are we doing? We're taxing production, we're taxing investment, we're taxing hard work. Why do we want to tax those things? Because when you tax something, you get less of it. I'd rather tax consumption. So if we can switch to a consumption tax, which would be a national sales tax, I don't want to do that on top of the income taxes. No way. I wouldn't let them do that unless we got rid of the income tax first. But a sales tax would be preferential. But if we're going to stick with an income tax, let's flatten it out. Everybody pay the same rate. The worst thing about the income tax is half the country doesn't even pay it. And it's very easy for somebody like Barack Obama to say, let's raise income taxes. Yeah, you're all for that when you're not paying it. I don't want somebody to say, vote for me and I'll tax your boss. Or vote for me and I'll tax your neighbor. I want people to know that if taxes go up, everybody pays them. So let's flatten it out, the same rate for everybody. And if we can exempt things like investment income, interest, dividends, savings, anything that would encourage more savings. Because right now our tax code punishes savings and encourages debt. And we're deep in debt. Nobody is saving anything. So we do need to reform the tax code.